Thank you very much. I want to welcome everybody to this meeting of the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Anderson.
Present.
Assemblywoman Black.
Here. See you later.
Assemblywoman Brown May. Assemblywoman Carlton.
Here.
Assemblywoman Cohen.
Here.
Assemblyman Ellison.
Present.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hanson.
Here.
Assemblywoman Martinez.
Present.
Assemblywoman Titus.
Here.
Assemblyman Wheeler.
Here.
Chair Watts.
I am here. Thank you. We have a quorum. I will take note and we'll make sure to mark Assemblywoman Brown May present as she arrives. Members, I'll begin before we go into the items on our agenda with a few quick housekeeping announcements. Let's see, as usual, please, members, remember to mute your microphones when you're not speaking so we can minimize background noise. Members of the public may participate in our meetings in a number of ways. Information on how to do so can be found on every meeting agenda for our committee, as well as on the help page at the Nevada Legislature's website. You can find a link to the help page in a header at the top of every page on that website. Participants must register to participate and can submit opinion polls or sign up to provide comments or testimony. Written comments can also be emailed to our committee manager, and the email for our committee manager is posted on our agendas and on our website before, during, or up to 48 hours after a meeting. All exhibits and amendments must be submitted electronically in PDF form to our committee manager no later than 4 p.m. on the business day prior to the meeting. Amendments must include bill number, statement of intent, and contact information. All exhibits can be found on the Nevada Legislature's websites, where you can also sign up for personalized legislative tracking. And we ask that comments be limited to 2 minutes so that we can get through the agenda in a timely fashion and make sure that we can accommodate all speakers. So with that, just so that members of the public and members of the committee know, I think we're going to start with our hearings, and then we will, once we have Assemblywoman Brown May, we'll take a brief pause to handle our work session, and we have a committee bill introduction to handle as well, and then we'll continue with the rest of our hearings. So with that, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which I believe we're going to do our bill hearings today, starting with AB 85, and then moving to AB 84, and then AJR 2. So with that, I would like to open the hearing on Assembly Bill 85, which revises provisions relating to noxious weeds. I would like to welcome Assemblywoman Heidi Swank, former Chair Swank, back to the Committee on Natural Resources. It's good to see you again. And you may proceed whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is good to be back in Assembly Natural Resources. So I'm just going to do just a really brief presentation here and then open up for questions. So as we all know, for folks who have been on natural resources or even not, just living in Nevada, that cheatgrass is a major issue in Northern Nevada. Since its introduction in 1906, it has overtaken the sagebrush sea and currently dominates roughly 20 million acres in Nevada and the Great Basin. Now, the impacts of this are several. One, it replaces sagebrush that sage grouse rely on for, among other things, migration corridors. It also fuels fires such as the massive Martin fire that we saw in 2018. And it has undermined the sagebrush sea, which is a historic landscape in the state of Nevada. However, there are ongoing efforts to hold back cheatgrass, not only in Nevada, but across the West. Now, we know that in areas that are fully dominated by cheatgrass, that are a cheatgrass monoculture, that the removal of all of the cheatgrass in those areas is probably not possible or practicable. But there are other areas that could have the cheatgrass removed, or at least held back from that area becoming a cheatgrass monoculture. So with that in mind, we also know that invasive plant and noxious weed programs are run by the Department of Agriculture. The Department of Agriculture sets lists of plants that are designated as noxious weeds, and noxious weeds are prioritized for action against their spread. They also receive some small amount of funding toward those efforts to eradicate or at least control the noxious weeds. So currently, according to NRS 555.130 that you see here in AB 85, cheatgrass could not be deemed a noxious weed because of that little part in our statute that actually dates to 1929 and says that because any grass that is already established in the state cannot be deemed a noxious weed. So what this bill does is just deletes that piece of language and that would then allow the state quarantine officer to deem cheatgrass or any other long established invasive like red brome, which we have in southern Nevada as a problem there. It could be deemed designated a noxious weed and therefore have access to some small amounts of funding through like the federal government. Now, this doesn't require that the state quarantine officer make that designation. It just says that person in that office can. And so it allows that judgment to be made by the state quarantine officer, who is an expert in those classifications and would be able to work with folks all over the state to determine if that classification should be made or not. That's my entire presentation. I know that Mr. Tibbetts is here, and he and I have been talking about an amendment that I know he's bringing. And so I think he'll be in an opposition. And then he and I have time set apart on Friday to talk it through and see what we can sort out if that's all right with the chair. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Ms. Swank, and for the update on the discussions regarding the amendment. Also, I'd like to note for the record that Assemblywoman Brown-May is present. With that, we will open it up to questions. I do not see anyone in the chat currently. So, all right, I see Assemblywoman Titus, her hand raised. Go ahead.
Sorry, I couldn't get in that chat. I just want to, it's just a comment and observation. Great to see you, Ms. Swank. Good to know that you're still engaged, and thank you for bringing this bill forward.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Titus. Good to see you too.
All right, thank you. I believe Assemblyman Ellison also had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ms. Swank, it's good seeing you again. I had a question when I was reading some of the stuff on the internet. It says prohibits, authorize the state's quarantine officer to declare any weed by noxious by regulations. So does that mean at any point in time that the state can come in and say, I feel this is a noxious weed and then declare it? Could you answer that for me? Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman Ellison, for that question. And that would be correct. The state quarantine officer is an expert in these sorts of classifications and would be able to, through regulation, deem it a noxious weed. There are no plans, as I understand it, for that to happen. This is merely, eliminating a roadblock so that we can let the experts do their jobs and know that they are, as I said, experts in the area.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question, sir. Do we have any other questions for Ms. Swank at this time? All right. Seeing none, thank you again for the presentation. We'll move on to testimony. We'll begin with testimony in support of Assembly Bill 85. And with that, I'd ask Broadcast and Production Services to please open up the queue and see who we have wishing to testify in support.
Thank you, Chair. To testify in support on AB 85, please press *9 now to enter the queue. Chair, there are no callers in support at this time.
Thank you. With that, we'll move on to anyone wishing to provide testimony in opposition to Assembly Bill 85.
To testify in opposition on Assembly Bill 85, please press *9 now to enter the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 010, please press *6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon. I'm Jake Tibbetts. That's JakeTibbitts, and I'm the Eureka County Natural Resources Manager. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for the opportunity to give our testimony. I am speaking on behalf of Eureka County. And Eureka County, we have submitted some written testimony, a potential proposed amendment, as Ms. Swank noted, already in communications with her to get together to find something that's going to meet the intent and work for all of us. We believe in the intent of AB 85. We too want to address the issues of cheatgrass and our shortened fire cycles and the continuing loss of our sagebrush ecosystem. Our concern is that currently, by listing cheatgrass as a noxious weed, it pulls in many other implications as far as abatement issues. There's also civil penalties in NRS 555-201. And currently, as it works right now, when the state quarantine officer designates weeds as noxious weeds, and they do go through a regulatory process to do that, it's a statewide listing of those weeds. And I do manage one of 8 weed districts, recognized weed districts under NRS 555 in the state. And I can tell you right now, we already have extreme limitations on just addressing the weeds that are on the noxious weed list. If we were to have to add weeds such as these widespread weeds and the legal obligations that are in the statute related to noxious weeds, we do think it could cause some undue consideration. So we do believe there's a way to get there. We're proposing an amendment to create some new type of designation, call it something like weeds for strategic control or something like that, that would, again, empower the state quarantine officer to list these fire-prone weeds that we're trying to target in very specific geographic areas to keep that cheatgrass or whatever else out of that area, I believe, which is the intent. And we do think there's a way to get there. So appreciate the opportunity to work with those to push this forward. And again, we do support the concept and looking forward to making this work for everybody. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Tibbetts, and look forward to getting some follow-up on the continued conversations between you and the bill sponsor. With that, we'll move on to the next caller in opposition.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 349, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
For the record, my name is Doug Busselman, D-O-U-G-B-U-S-S-E-L-M-A-N. I am the Executive Vice President of Nevada Farm Bureau. We have struggled to determine where our organization's position fits into the 3 options for testifying on bills. If I correctly understand the criteria for picking from the 3 options, we are here today to testify in opposition to AB 85. Farm Bureau strongly supports increased efforts and effectiveness in controlling noxious weeds. We also strongly support efforts and effectiveness in reversing the explosive expansion of cheatgrass dominance that has led to the disastrous effects on wildfire conditions. Our concern with AB 85 is our belief that making the changes to the existing law by deleting the words proposed by AB 85, that there will have the desired changes in the Department of Agriculture's ability or capacity to do anything different than what they do now. When you put the entire section of NRS 555 and the noxious weeds into perspective, there are significant and severe consequences for how noxious weed control measures are applied on private property owners. As though in those instances, when noxious weed problems are capable of being correctable, we support the responsibilities that the current law call for. We don't believe that all weeds, especially cheatgrass, can be corrected by noxious weed law as envisioned in AB 85. We believe that AB 85 will necessarily improve or will not necessarily improve the end results. At the same time, we think that there could be negative consequences taking out the safety provisions for applying noxious weed authorities in cases where specific weed control is impractical or possibly impossible. Thanks for your time this afternoon.
Thank you very much for your testimony and for following the guidelines for providing testimony, which is to testify in opposition if you do not support the measure as written. So much appreciation for that, Mr. Busselman. We'll go on to the next caller in opposition.
Chair, we have no more callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you very much. With that, we'll move to testimony in the neutral position. Before we go to the phones BPS, I know we have folks from the Department of Agriculture on Zoom, and so I wanted to pause briefly to see if they had any testimony that they'd like to offer, and also to provide an opportunity for members to ask any questions that they may have for the department. I believe we have Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Megan Brown, for the record, Nevada Department of Agriculture. I'm just here to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brown. Do members have any questions for the department?
Yes, I do.
Ellison does. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just got the letter that came in from Nevada Mining Association. And have you looked at that? Because they mentioned ranching and not only the public lands, but also the private lands. Have you looked at that at all as the Cattlemen's Association?
Mr. Chair, may I respond?
Yes.
But yeah, that was for you. Yes.
I have not reviewed all of the submitted testimony, but I am happy to review that and share that with other members of the department.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Looks like it's Titus. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is for the Department of Ag. In recent years, the cheatgrass has been considered under the grazing permits, especially in springtime now, and on these grazing allotments, they can now bring their cattle in at certain times of year to graze this off because it's edible at the small amount of time. And I'm just wondering if this is decided that this is a noxious weed, will that change any of those grazing permits and all? Because cheatgrass was, I have an original document when cheatgrass was first introduced because it really was going to be for grazing. And I still have copies of that original document released by the Department of Ag. So I'm curious if it will affect that figuring or calculation in their grazing allotments.
Mr. Chair, Megan Brown, for the record, to Assemblywoman Titus. I don't administer BLM grazing permits or U.S. Forest Service permits, so I am not sure how that change in designation and calculation would affect grazing permits.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Are there any other questions for Ms. Brown in the department? All right. Seeing none, with that, Broadcast Production Services, can we see if we have anybody on the phone to testify in neutral on AB 85?
To testify in neutral on Assembly Bill 85, please press *9 now to enter the queue. Chair, it seems that there are no callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you very much, BPS. Assemblywoman Swank has brought her traditional efficiency back to the committee. Are there any closing remarks that you'd like to make, Ms. Swank?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, Mr. Tibbetts and I will meet on Friday, and I would say in response to Mr. Busselman's testimony, while it's always good to hear from Mr. Busselman, that these aren't removing any safety provisions. We have a state quarantine officer because they are an expert in this area and can make those judgments. That state quarantine officer is our safety provision here in the state of Nevada. I think that also to emphasize that this does not change anything going forward. It just allows the state engineer to do their job, sorry, not the state engineer, wrong bill, the state quarantine officer to do their job. And moving forward, instead of putting that piece in legislation, when really we should let the science dictate that. So with that, thank you so much. It's always good to be in Assembly Natural Resources, still my home, and I look forward to working with Mr. Tibbetts to hone this bill.
Thank you very much, Ms. Swank. And I think we will have a couple more bills from the Division of Water Resources if you'd like to speak about the state engineer. With that, I'll close the hearing on Assembly Bill 85. Members, we're now going to move to our voting items for today. We're going to start with a bill draft introduction. As a reminder, a vote to introduce a bill is not an indication of support for the bill. It is merely to get it turned in so we can have it assigned a bill number and then returned, hopefully, to this committee for potential additional consideration. So with that, we have before us BDR 51-559, which revises provisions governing the production and sale of eggs and egg products. So with that, do we have a motion to introduce this bill?
So moved.
All right, I believe I heard a first from Vice Chair Cohen. Who did we have? Okay, we had a second from Assemblywoman Titus. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, will the secretary please conduct a roll call vote?
Assemblywoman Anderson?
Yes.
Assemblywoman Black?
Yes.
Assemblywoman Brown May?
Yes.
Assemblywoman Carlton?
Yes.
Assemblywoman Cohen?
Yes.
Assemblyman Ellison?
Yes.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez?
Yes.
Assemblywoman Hanson?
Yes.
Assemblywoman Martinez?
Yes.
Assemblywoman Titus?
Yes.
Assemblyman Wheeler?
Yes.
Chair Watts?
Yes, thank you. That motion carries unanimously. I appreciate that. We'll now move on to the work session. And before we get into the work session itself, I would like the committee to reconsider Assembly Bill 34, which we heard on February 22nd and voted on March 10th. It's come to my attention since then that the bill needs an additional amendment. So the purpose of this reconsideration would be to remove language that authorizes the imposition of a fee. The result of this removal of the fee authority should be that the 2/3 requirement is removed from the bill once it is reprinted. You should be able to find the amendment on Nellis. I also sent it to all the members earlier. With that, can I get a motion from a member to reconsider the committee's action on Assembly Bill 34?
I move to reconsider the committee's action on Assembly Bill 34.
Thank you. I have a motion from Vice Chair Cohen. Do I have a second?
Second from Martinez.
Thank you. I believe I had a second from Assemblywoman Martinez. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, will the secretary please conduct a roll call vote?
Assemblywoman Anderson?
Yes.
Assemblywoman Black?
Yes.
Assemblywoman Brown May?
Yes.
Assemblywoman Carlton? Assemblywoman Cohen,
Yes.
Assemblyman Ellison,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Hanson,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Martinez,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Titus,
Yes.
Assemblyman Wheeler,
Yes.
Chair Watts.
Yes. Thank you. That motion carries. So having taken the action to reconsider Assembly Bill 34, we'll start our work session with Assembly Bill 34. I provided an overview of the additional amendment, which, as I noted, is also posted on Nellis, which removes the fee authority and would remove the 2/3 requirement for the bill once it is reprinted. So I don't believe that we need any additional explanation from Mr. Stinisbeck on this one. So are there any questions from members first before we do a motion? All right. Hearing none, we would take a motion to amend and do pass Assembly Bill 34. And just to be clear, the motion to amend and do pass would include the original amendments in our first work session, as well as the additional amendment to remove the fee authority provided on Nellis.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
I have a motion from Assemblyman Wheeler. Do I have a second?
Second.
I've got a second from Vice Chair Cohen. Thank you. Is there any discussion on this motion? Hearing none, I'd ask the secretary to please conduct a roll call vote.
Assemblywoman Anderson,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Black,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Brown May,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Carlton,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Cohen,
Yes.
Assemblyman Ellison,
No.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Hanson,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Martinez,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Titus,
Yes.
Assemblyman Wheeler,
Yes.
Chair Watts.
Yes. That motion carries. I had assigned the floor statement to Assemblywoman Gonzalez originally, so we will keep that floor statement assignment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. With that, we'll move to the last item on our work session, which is Assembly Bill 40. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Stinisbeck to please walk us through the work session document for Assembly Bill 40.
Thank you, Chair Watts. For the record, Jan Stinisbeck with the Research Division of the LCB. Assembly Bill 40 was heard in this committee on February 17th. The bill expands the definition of operator and storage tank and requires that before storage tank is eligible for the coverage of certain costs from the fund for cleaning up discharge of petroleum, the operator must, unless certain requirements are met, demonstrate that the storage tank is being monitored for a discharge and a discharge not occurred. Lastly, the bill removes the definition of small business and instead requires the board to review claims to define the term by regulation. There have been two proposed amendments to this bill. The first by the Division of Environmental Protection and the second by the Nevada Petroleum Marketers and Convenience Store Association. And both amendments make changes to the disbursements of the fund for cleaning up discharges of petroleum. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Stinisbeck. Are there any questions from members? Seeing none, I would accept a motion to amend and do pass Assembly Bill 40.
Move to amend and do pass.
Thank you. I've got a motion from Vice Chair Cohen. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. I've got a second from Assemblywoman Gonzalez. Is Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, will the secretary please conduct a roll call vote?
Assemblywoman Anderson,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Black,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Brown May,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Carlton,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Cohen,
Yes.
Assemblyman Ellison,
No.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Hanson,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Martinez,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Titus,
Yes.
Assemblyman Wheeler,
Yes.
Chair Watts.
Yes. That motion carries. And I will assign the floor statement to Assemblywoman Hanson. I believe that concludes our work session. Thank you, committee members. And with that, we will move back into our hearings. And I believe the next item that we'll hear is Assembly Bill 84, which revises provisions relating to wildfires. I'd like to welcome Senator Scheibel, as well as Jana Moen with the Nature Conservancy to present Assembly Bill 84. And you may begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much, Chair Watts. Members of the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources, for the record, I am Senator Melanie Scheibel, and I represent Senate District 9 in Clark County. I'm here today to present Assembly Bill 84, which authorizes the state forester fire warden with certain approval to enter into public-private partnerships to address the threat of catastrophic wildfires. With me today to present the bill is Jana Moen, Director of External Affairs with the Nature Conservancy. With the Chair's permission, I will first provide a brief background information and a summary of this very short bill before I turn it over to my co-presenter for further details.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you. Assembly Bill 84 was proposed by the committee to conduct an interim study concerning wildfires. It was my pleasure to serve as the vice chair of that committee during the 2019-2020 interim. As you may know, the committee was created in 2019 by Assembly Concurrent Resolution 4, and the committee was tasked with considering methods of reducing wildfire fuels, issues related to early responses to wildfires, and the economic impact of wildfires on the state and local communities. While studying wildfires this past interim, it became clear that we needed to harness all resources available, including the private sector. Former Assemblywoman Heidi Swank, chair of the committee, recommended the concept in AB 84, and the committee unanimously voted to request the bill draft. Hundreds of wildfires occur each year in Nevada. In recent years, we have experienced especially devastating wildfires. The 2018 Martin and Sugarloaf fires alone burned nearly 1 million acres of land in Northeast Nevada. Extremely dry conditions caused in part by climate change, along with the spread of invasive plants like cheatgrass and increased housing development in the wildland-urban interface, have left the state particularly vulnerable to dangerous fire seasons. Because of Nevada's large proportion of public lands, several agencies share responsibility for wildfire prevention and suppression in the state. While it's often local governments that first respond to a wildfire, wildfire prevention and suppression is usually done in coordination with state, federal, and other partners. As we look into the future, the threat of catastrophic wildfires will only increase. Therefore, we must remain vigilant and find new ways of addressing this ever-increasing threat. Assembly Bill 84 seeks to do this by authorizing the state to enter into public-private partnerships. Specifically, AB 84 authorizes such public-private partnerships to address without limitation investment in wildfire prevention, restoration, infrastructure, and workforce development for enhancing landscape resiliency against the threat of wildfires. And with the chair's permission, I would now like to turn it over to Jana Moen, my co-presenter, to provide some more information about this bill.
Thank you very much, Senator, and welcome, Ms. Moen. You may proceed whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Senator Scheibel, for the introduction. And thank you, Chair Watts and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Jana Moen, and I'm the External Affairs Director for the Nature Conservancy in Nevada. I'm here today with my colleague, Mickey Hazelwood. I am here to present Assembly Bill 84, and Mickey will present Assembly Joint Resolution 2. Both the bill and the resolution originated from the interim committee to conduct a study on wildfire, as you just heard. We thank that committee for their work in the interim. Their hearings daylighted a number of opportunities for enhancing wildfire prevention, readiness, response, and restoration efforts. As the committee was wrapping up its meetings, Assemblywoman Swank asked the Nature Conservancy if we had any ideas that would help the state address the issue of wildfire, but that did not require a financial outlay. At that time, we were in the thick of the COVID pandemic, and the outlook for state revenue was grim. Assembly Bill 84 and Assembly Joint Resolution 2 are two ideas that resulted from our discussion with Assemblywoman Swank in response to this question, and we're pleased to be here to co-present them to you today. For the next few minutes, I just want to share why we think public-private partnerships are a useful tool for addressing wildfire threat. Public-private partnerships, or PPPs, are financial and legal arrangements that use private investment to fund or provide public goods or services. PPPs are frequently used to develop transportation and infrastructure projects. In Nevada, there are 3 places in statute we have found that authorize public-private partnerships. NRS Section 338 authorizes PPPs for transportation facilities. NRS Section 321 authorizes them for the preservation and adaptive reuse of historic properties. And NRS 408-357, they were approved to complete the Boulder City bypass project. In these instances, PPPs were established to help finance large infrastructure or renovation projects. With AB 84, we are proposing that they can be used to address wildfire threat. We know we need to reduce fuel loads and enhance healthy soils in our forest and rangelands. These activities are large natural infrastructure endeavors, so the rationale behind AB 84 is that a public-private partnership model can help leverage public funds with private investment in wildfire threat reduction and landscape resiliency enhancement. We've done a little research into how public-private partnerships have been used to address wildfire threat, and we found that they are a multi-purpose tool. They can be used to enhance wildfire prevention and readiness efforts by directly deploying on-the-ground conservation crews. For example, in 2010, the city of Auburn, California used a PPP to mobilize local volunteers and conservation corps for forest thinning projects. PPPs have also been used to provide direct wildfire response with both equipment and operations support. In San Diego in 2013, utilities and the company Erickson Air Crane joined agencies through public-private partnerships to provide helitanker equipment and manpower to support wildfire suppression operations. PPPs have also been successfully used to implement forest restoration on a large landscape level. Effective forest restoration treatments seek to avoid stand replacing fires by reducing fuel loads through mechanical treatments and prescribed fire. But to be effective, forest restoration needs to be done at a large scale and requires substantial investment. The National Forest Foundation has helped establish public-private partnerships to provide long-term funding for forest restoration work, and I have 2 examples of successful efforts. First is the Yuba Fund in Sierra County, California, which is a partnership between the Yuba Water Authority, the Tahoe National Forest, an NGO called Blue Forest Conservation, and the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. The PPP is funded by a forest resilience bond financed by collective contributions from the partners and has taken a lead on implementing projects on over 5,000 acres in the Yuba River watershed. Treatments are designed to reduce surface and ladder fuels to a level that would allow for safe fire suppression and improve wildlife habitat. The second example is the Northern Arizona Forest Fund, where a power and water utility, the Salt River Project, partnered with the National Forest Foundation to implement forest restoration projects in the headwaters of the Salt and Verde rivers. They are a source of drinking water for the Phoenix metropolitan area. The source of revenue for the Forest Fund is a mixture of public and private revenue generated from forest restoration investment packages. The fund is used to implement on-the-ground restoration and fuel reduction projects. The PPP model is also being used to enhance resiliency in rangelands. In 2020, a public-private partnership called the Cheatgrass Challenge was launched in Idaho. In this inaugural year, the challenge selected 6 restoration projects in sagebrush habitat to receive a total of $750,000 of investment generated from a mix of federal and state agency funds and private investments. In addition to establishing innovative funding mechanisms for forest restoration, these public-private partnerships help provide jobs and connect communities to their watersheds. In closing, we think that public-private partnerships are a useful mechanism for addressing the threat of wildfire in both our forests and rangelands. AB 84 will give Nevada's fire warden the ability to enter into and manage public-private partnerships, and it will be another tool in our box for tackling this complex problem. We hope that you will support this bill, and we are happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Ms. Moen, and for providing some examples of public-private partnerships that have been used to address this issue. With that, we'll move to questions from members of the committee, and we will start with Assemblywoman Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to ask a question. Thank you for the presentation. As a member of the interim committee on wildfires, I think it's critical that we make some progress in saving our Nevada lands. And I do believe that those who testify and presented this bill really care about helping preserve our Nevada wildlands. The question involves, so conceptually, I'm actually supportive of the state forester entering into some PPEs, also MOUs, memorandums of understandings, and other things that they need to do in their job and in their scope. We certainly have heard testimony on that during the committee meetings. My question, however, is wanting to make sure that it goes on the record that they cannot, he or she, whoever our state forester is, this does not allow them to commit any state dollars. That it's just understanding that it would be private dollars that are used here, and that if there's any state dollars that would have to go through the normal process of either IFC or coming back to the finance committees. And I just want to make sure that's clear that this is just an agreement to do work or maybe accept funds, but we can't obligate our state funds with this agreement.
I'm happy to take this question if you'd like. Senator
Go
Scheibel,
ahead, Senator Scheibel.
for the record. And without having run that exact question by legal, I would agree. That is my understanding of the bill. I could foresee a circumstance in which we would want to pay a private organization to do something like fuel abatement or something like that. But just to your point, it would have to go through the normal process to get an allocation or have to be part of the Department of Forestry's budget to begin with. This does not allow the forester to sua sponte start handing money to private organizations from the state coffers.
Great, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you very much for the question. I believe we have another question from Assemblyman Ellison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really enjoyed the presentation. I think that was great, but I do have a couple questions. Will this bill allow first responders to be on the ground, like ranchers or construction workers around there? If they're first responders they won't get fined or for crossing the lines, that kind of thing. That's my first one. And does that also include removal of brush and debris that helps build up to the fuel for these fires? Could you add to that one first? And I got one more after that.
Thank you, Assemblyman Ellison. For the record, Jana Moen. And yes, to answer your second question, it would include the addressing the reduction of fuel load prior to a fire. That's what our interest was in discussing this bill. And I'm sorry, can you repeat your first question, Assemblyman?
Thank you. And what it is, like BLM did a few years back, what they did was said, okay, the first responders there would probably be ranchers or whatever. They could actually start putting the fire out right then and there instead of waiting until a team come in. So would this bill allow for that? Because the first responders, it sometimes can get a wrap around these fires.
Thank you, Assemblyman Ellison. For the record, Jana Moen. And I believe that any sort of agreement that would pertain to who could participate in certain activities would be worked out by the specific public-private partnership that the fire warden would have entered into. This bill simply gives the authorization for the fire warden to enter into such agreements, but any sort of partners that would respond to a fire or be on the ground or conduct any of the activities under that partnership would be specified by that individual agreement. However, that's not to say that a public-private partnership couldn't be formed that included first responders and ranchers and members of that community. That is similar to the example I provided in San Diego, where there was a public-private partnership that worked, and also the one in the Yuba Water Authority as well.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, and one follow-up, if I may.
Go ahead, briefly, Mr. Ellison.
And you mentioned the Sagebrush Challenge in Idaho. I think that's a great idea. But when they go back in, are they going to put actual native grass back in there away from the sheetgrass?
Thank you for the question, Assemblyman Ellison. For the record, Jane Amon. And there are currently 6 projects that have been funded by that cheatgrass challenge, and they range from restoration improvements to reseeding projects to I think there's also a PJ project in there as well. So the projects with that particular challenge are selected each year by the partners involved in the cheatgrass challenge, and they also select how to spend that fund that they have collectively contributed to.
And I thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's a lot of information come out of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I know that we do have the State Forester Fire Warden on. I believe we'll wait until we get to neutral and then, allow the Forester Fire Warden to address any of these items that may have come up and provide additional opportunity if anyone has questions for Ms. Casey. I believe we have a question from Vice Chair Cohen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for the presentation. I have a question about the process, I guess, of the entering into, negotiating and entering into, et cetera, the public-private partnerships. So does the Forester Fire Warden have access to a DAG to help them with that type of negotiation and making sure that the contract is, that there's nothing in the contract that we wouldn't want to see for the state?
I would just, I'll let the sponsors speak to how they envision the process working, and then I'd ask that you follow up specifically with the Forester Fire Warden about the DAG issue in neutral.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Cohen, for that question. I honestly cannot say what the specific process would be. I would imagine it would be a contractual arrangement that would go through the typical channels of contractual agreements that Department of Conservation and Natural Resources enters into, but I look forward to hearing the State Forester's answer to that question.
Thank you.
Thank you. I believe we have a question from Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator, as well as Ms. Moen, for bringing us on up. I'm concerned that my question is going to be a very newbie, simplistic question. So if we need to do this offline, I'm more than happy to have a conversation away from the committee about this. With these agreements, are they long-term agreements? Or are they just a short-term agreement? Or is that part of the negotiation process when it is entering into these agreements?
Thank you, Assemblywoman Ellison. For the record, Jane Amon. It depends what the purpose of the agreement is for. Certainly, there are a lot of times public-private partnerships are entered into for transportation infrastructure, and in that case, in one that I cited that was authorized in statute in NRS, it was authorized for the Boulder City Bypass project. And so that's a finite project with a certain length of time. And so these public-private partnerships can be long-term endeavors. A lot of times, I think the forest funding restoration efforts are longer-term endeavors because in those efforts, they're seeking to build up a fund to help fund restoration, and restoration efforts also take time. And so I can imagine that those agreements would extend multiple years with options for parties to come and go. But really the time frame for the public-private partnerships would be really open and dependent upon what the purpose of the PPP is created for. hope that
Thank you. That clarifies a few of the questions that I had, because in my mind, I'm thinking, so if it's a long-term, if it's a 25-year process, let's just say, like, I don't know if the Yuba fire shed is like that, but I know that that's been around for some time. Is there ever any sort of legislative oversight or governor oversight or other committee or public body oversight with it, or does it continue to be an agreement that the oversight is only within that department? I guess is the secondary question, if the chair would allow me to ask that, which I just
Yes,
did.
I'll
Thank you,
allow if the sponsors wish to respond, although I'd note that contracts are subject to internal controls of the agencies, and we as the legislature get reviews of the internal controls and processes that agencies have from the audit division. And then also in general, practices would be subject to legislative audits as well. So I just wanted to note that, and if the sponsors have anything they'd wish to add on that point.
Thank you, Chair Watts. I don't have anything to add. This is Jane Amon for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for that clarification, and thank you for the answers.
Thank you. One other note is that, while the department would, or the division would oversee those programs, there are frequently either formal reports. It's not listed as a requirement under this legislation, but we also have various interim and bodies during the session to which we get reports on activities. So that's another venue for information on how certain programs are proceeding. With that, are there any other questions from members? Seeing none, thank you both for the presentation. And with that, we will go to Broadcast Production Services to see if we have anyone wishing to provide testimony in support of Assembly Bill 84.
Thank you, Chair. To provide testimony in support on Assembly Bill 84, please press *9 now to enter the queue. Caller with the last three digits 010, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you. Jake Tibbetts, JakeTibbitts, the Natural Resource Manager for Eureka County, speaking on behalf of Eureka County. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you again for the opportunity. Eureka County does support AB 84 as written. We note that the best wildfire response and risk reduction efforts, they have local buy-in and they're locally led. We see great opportunities in this bill to assist local fire districts, fire response agencies, and groups like our two Firewise communities we have in Eureka County to leverage private party efforts and resources and to drive innovation in the wildfire risk reduction arena. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Tibbetts. We'll move on to the next caller in support.
Caller with the last three digits 058, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Keith Lee, last name Lee, L-E-E. I'm the lobbyist for the Alert Wildfire Systems, DBA Wildfire Live. Wildfire Live is a Nevada corporation which, in conjunction with UNR, is deploying and operating cameras that detect, confirm, and assist in fighting wildfires. This technology was developed by a team at the University of Nevada Seismological Lab. The fire camera system began in 2013 with Alert Tahoe fire camera and has grown to more than 800 cameras in 5 states. We support AB 84, allowing the state forester fire warden to expand her authority to contract with private companies to establish partnerships to assist in the battle against wildfires is crucial to the success in prevention, early detection, suppression, mitigation, and identification of causes of wildfire. And as an aside, Mr. Chairman, I might say that this concept of private public partnerships has worked well in the state of California, where over time the independently owned utilities and CAL FIRE and other state agencies have entered into these contracts that have allowed the disbursement and deployment of almost 800 cameras. So we certainly support this. It is a great concept and puts one more arrow in the quiver of the State Forester Fire Warden in her efforts to prevent and combat wildfires. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the time.
Thank you very much for your comments, Mr. Lee. We'll move on to the next caller wishing to provide support on Assembly Bill 84.
Caller with the last three digits 155. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christy Cabrera, CHRISTI-CABRERA. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director for the Nevada Conservation League here in support of AB 84. Science tells us that climate change is making the West hotter and drier, contributing to larger, more intense wildfires. And last year's fire season set new records in terms of geographic scale, fire intensity, and rates of spread. These wildfires have disastrous impacts on natural areas and wildlife habitat, and the pollution effects from smoke are hazardous to our health. Encouraging collaboration and partnerships will help our state better mitigate and respond to wildfire, and we urge your support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go on to the next caller in support.
Caller with the last three digits 349. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Doug Busselman, DOUGBUSSELMAN. I'm the Executive Vice President of Nevada Farm Bureau. We are testifying today in support of AB 84. Nevada Farm Bureau has policy in favor of empowering local officials to work cooperatively with state and federal agencies and other public firefighting agencies to establish local management programs, plans, and organized efforts. We support the State Forest Fire Warden and the empowerment necessary for local entities through the agreements and subsequent authorities presented in AB 84. Thank you for this opportunity to share our perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Busselman, for your comments. We'll go on to the next caller.
Chair, there are no more callers in support at this time.
Thank you. With that, we'll move to testimony in opposition of Assembly Bill 84.
To testify in opposition on Assembly Bill 84, please press *9 now to enter the queue. Chair, there are no callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you. With that, we'll move to testimony in neutral on Assembly Bill 84. Before we go to the phones, I want to provide an opportunity for our State Forester Fire Warden, Casey, to make any comments that she'd like to, and then to open it to any questions, additional questions that members may have. So, Ms. Casey, please proceed whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. I will just try to answer a couple of the questions in one lump sum here. We do have a process for contracts or agreements that go through our both our assigned DAG and also either the right avenue if it's Board of Examiners for some or IFC. So there is a legislative review process for all of our stuff. Our assigned DAG actually reviews all of our contracts and works on the language with ourselves and the proponents. A good example of that was our NV Energy agreement that kind of falls under this. They worked very closely with NV Energy's DAGs or lawyers to get the language correct. All the way down to our sub-grant agreements. We do sub-grants with different communities. So he reviews all of our sub-grant forms. So all of that is done through that process. And this, we understand that this wouldn't commit any funds of the state unless we went through the process. So as far as allowing first responders, ranchers to respond to fires, that's something we currently do. Both through our Rural Fire Protection Association statutes, also through our agreement with the federal agencies. We work very closely with them. In addition, through provisions for emergency response, we're allowed to make emergency contracts with ranchers. If they have equipment that we need, we can sign them up on site as well. All approved processes going through the process. And I'd be happy to answer any additional questions if I missed any.
Thank you very much for that clarification, Ms. Casey. Are there any additional questions for our Forester Fire Warden?
I've got one, sir, if I may.
Go ahead, Mr. Ellison.
Thank you. And I think you answered all my questions other than pruning and underbrush. The young lady did say a great deal on that. Is that something you're going to expand on in the future, you think? Not only does it protect sage grouse, it protects the habitat, but pruning and removal of brush around trees is devastating to the forest. Can you answer that? Is that something you're going to increase or just leave it the way it is?
Thank you for the question, Assemblyman Ellison. Again, for the record, Casey, State Forester Fire Warden. It's different on every project. Every project that we look at, we're working in partnership with usually private landowners or public, BLM, Forest Service, Department of Defense, whoever the landowner might be. So we're continuously looking, before we ever do a project, we do a project plan. We're looking at what are our goals and objectives, what are our resource objectives. If we're looking for increased water supply, if we're looking for a decrease in, say, noxious weeds, cheatgrass, if we're looking for forest health improvements, usually we're looking at multiple objectives, considering habitat and cultural resources as well. So all of our projects go through a very thorough vetting process, and we write this up so that everybody's aware of how this project should be implemented. So it's hard to say whether we'll do more or less. We do pruning projects. It's more likely that we would do a thinning project than a pruning project. We learned a long time ago pruning sometimes rings a dinner bell for bugs and insect and disease. So we're constantly looking at what's going to be most effective for the objectives that we need to meet.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Ms. Casey? All right. Thank you very much for joining us and making yourself available. With that, we'll move on broadcast production services to see if anyone is on the phone wishing to provide testimony in neutral on Assembly Bill 84.
To testify in neutral on Assembly Bill 84, please press *9 now to enter the queue. Chair, there are no callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you. With that, I'd like to turn it over to the sponsors to see if they have any closing remarks that they'd like to make.
Thank you, Chair Watts and members of the committee. For the record, this is Jana Moan, and I just want to say thank you so much for your consideration of this bill. We do think that public-private partnerships are a good tool that we can use for our toolbox for fighting wildfire, and I appreciate the opportunity to present the bill again. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to Senator Scheibel.
Thank you. And I will just echo Ms. Moan's gratitude to all of you for hearing this bill today and engaging with us, asking questions. We appreciate it, and I hope that you will support it going forward.
Thank you very much. With that, I will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 84, and we will open the hearing on Assembly Joint Resolution 2, which recognizes that forest health and water quality are inextricably linked. And we will welcome Senator Scheibel as well as Ms. Hazelwood from the Nature Conservancy. You may begin by introducing yourselves for the record whenever you are ready. Mr. Hazelwood, sorry.
Well, thank you, Chair Watts and members of the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources. I am still Melanie Scheibel, and I still represent Senate District 9 in Clark County. And it's my pleasure to present Assembly Joint Resolution 2, which recognizes that forest health and water quality are inextricably linked. The resolution is also one of the measures proposed by the committee to conduct an interim study concerning wildfires. One amendment to the resolution has been proposed by the Nature Conservancy, and it is available on Nellis. There was also an amendment proposed by Eureka County, and I consider both to be friendly amendments. With me today to present the resolution is Nikki Hazelwood, Eastern Sierra Nevada Program Director with the Nature Conservancy. And with the chair's permission, I'll first provide a brief background on the bill and a summary of the resolution before I turn it over to my co-presenter, Mr. Hazelwood, for further discussion.
Yes, please proceed.
All right. As you know from the presentation you just heard during the 2019 to 2020 interim, the committee to conduct an interim study concerning wildfires heard testimony on the catastrophic impacts that wildfires have on various environments, including watersheds and the conservation science practices that might aid wildfire management. Healthy forests work as an organic filter to keep sediment and other contaminants out of water. They also operate as natural sponges by collecting precipitation. The ability of forests to aid in the filtration of water provides enormous benefits to the ecosystem and to the public health of our communities, as it reduces the need for water treatment. The loss or degradation of forests negatively impacts water quality in watersheds and increases the risk of depleted groundwater levels. Assembly Joint Resolution 2, as introduced, recognizes that forest health and water quality are inextricably linked and expresses support for the federal government, state agencies, and local governments to work with the water purveyors and other stakeholders to identify watersheds that can be improved by better forest health measures. As I previously mentioned, there are 2 proposed amendments that are available to you on Nellis, and I believe that those amendments provide additional language that strengthen the resolution. With the chair's permission, I will now turn it over to Mr. Hazelwood to provide you with some additional information about AJR 2.
Thank you very much, Senator. Mr. Hazelwood, please proceed whenever you're ready.
Thank you for that introduction, Senator Scheibel. For the record, I am Mickey Hazelwood, Eastern Sierra Nevada Program Director for the Nature Conservancy in Nevada. Thank you, Chair Watts and members of the committee for the opportunity to speak with you today. The Nature Conservancy is encouraged by the introduction of Assembly Joint Resolution 2 because it addresses an issue we believe is highly important to Nevada and Nevadans. I'm going to
you're on mute, Mr. Hazelwood.
Mr. Hazelwood.
What happened there? Let me share this
There you
brief
go.
PowerPoint presentation with you. About the problem there. So, as this resolution acknowledges, the links between, our forested landscapes and water resources are truly inextricable. The waters flowing from the snow-capped mountain ranges from which our state takes its name are truly the lifeblood of the driest state in the union, sustaining both people and nature. And unfortunately, many of those landscapes, as we've already talked about today, are at risk of wildfire. The Nature Conservancy became engaged in this issue through our work in the Truckee River watershed, where for the past 2 decades, the Nature Conservancy in Nevada has promoted the health of the Truckee River, investing over $50 million in protection and restoration. Most recently, that work is focused on restoration of the headwaters forest in collaboration with the Forest Service, Truckee Meadows Water Authority, the National Forest Foundation, and others. Because we realize if we really want to have clean, healthy rivers and streams, we need to work to protect them at their various sources. So this infographic that we developed is written specific to the Truckee River watershed. The links demonstrated here are true to watersheds across. Healthy forests maximize snow retention, meter snow melt and water delivery, and naturally filter that water, as we already said. These systems support not only fish and wildlife, they provide the waters that support our homes, businesses, and agriculture. And they provide the places where Nevadans and the folks who visit our recreate. So across the state, these systems are important to our way of life and our economy. However, one spark on the wrong day in the wrong place can change much. When these landscapes are struck by unnaturally large and intense wildfires, post-fire impacts can be devastating. These types of fires lead to denuded lands that can't support wildlife or human needs. And these landscapes allow sediment, ash, and debris to be readily transported into our waterways. Now, this set of images are from the Rio Grande watershed in New Mexico. Use these because this is a place I used to recreate many years ago when my graduate days in New Mexico. The image on the left is from the Los Conchas fire in 2011. The image in the center there is just a snippet of the more than 150,000 acres burned at high intensity during that event. The image on the right is of the water quality pre and post fire runoff from the landscapes upstream, the watershed. I was able to revisit this landscape almost exactly 3 years ago, and I spent time talking with the folks who lived through this event and are currently working to mitigate ongoing impacts. So I'm there 7 years later, and I took a drive one day out into this landscape. And it looks exactly, 7 years later, looks exactly like the image. I drove past trailhead after trailhead, places that I used to go many years ago, and not a car in sight, but sign of human life or much life at all, for that matter. And I stood in Los Alamos, where this picture on the left was taken. And, I was pumping gas in my rental car and looking up at the burned slopes of town. And, I was taken aback. I could picture myself in Gardnerville or Austin or Ely. This could have been anywhere. And it was truly a gut-wrenching experience for me. And then soon after I returned from that trip, also in 2018, it was confirmed for me that events like this could potentially happen here at home. In the summer of 2018, a thunderstorm dropped rain on Slinkard Fire Scar of Topaz. And fortunately, the sludge you see here that came off that relatively small burn scar didn't make it into the lake. However, it did shut down 395 for the better part of a 24-hour period. It impacted the businesses here in Topaz. And as we've seen in recent years, the large rangeland fires were mentioned earlier across the state. We've seen how fires in those landscapes can also impact streams that flow through them and the important spring systems that rise from them. So, this is an issue across Nevada. Events like this can impact the lives of any Nevadan. It doesn't matter if you're a farmer, a rancher, a small business owner. Doesn't matter if you enjoy recreating in this state as a hunter or an angler, bird watcher, a hiker or skier. We've seen people from all walks of life impacted by events like all across the Western United States. We just really don't want to see Nevada and Nevadans fall further victim to events. And so we greatly appreciate the spirit of AJR 2. We did propose some amendments to the language, the existing language for AJR 2. We wanted to add snow in addition to rainfall into the language and the term metered release. As we discussed, that gradual release of snow melt into our systems allows us to have water in those systems at the driest times of year when we need that water the most. And then we also wanted to include quantity as well as quality in the language in this resolution, because, again, what I just mentioned is an example of that, where healthy systems meter out the release of this water and provide adequate quantities at times we need it most. Unhealthy landscapes, burned landscapes, likely won't do that for us. We also wanted to include some additional whereas statements, because we felt that there were some other links that needed to be explicitly made in this resolution. For one, extended drought due to climate change is exacerbating the size and intensity of wildfires in both our forests and rangelands. We think it was important to explicitly state that a long history of fire suppression has resulted in closed canopy systems, which are at higher risk for intense wildfires, large intense wildfires, and they also don't manage that snowpack as effectively and efficiently as historically. And then we also wanted to explicitly make a connection between these resources and our local and state economy. So again, we believe this resolution is a step in the right direction toward protecting our state from unwanted impact. And we appreciate that it memorializes the important links between our forests, our water resources. We greatly appreciate that it encourages the cooperation and collaboration that is so important in tackling the issue. It's much bigger than any one agency or any one organization. And we hope that this resolution will serve as a tool, as a key that could open the door to additional resources for our collective efforts to restore and manage our watershed into the future. So again, we want to thank each of you for considering Assembly Joint Resolution 2. We hope that you'll support it. And again, thank you for your time. Hearing this, I'd like to take any questions you may have.
All right. Thank you very much for the presentation. With that, we'll open it up to questions from members of the committee, and I believe we'll start with Assemblywoman Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, thank you for bringing this bill forward. Again, on that committee, we had lots of different discussions on how we can reverse some of the tragedies that we've had. I just want to clarify that this particular resolution won't be contrary to contracts and agreements that we've had for our sage grouse program, the juniper sage interface. We have literally cut down thousands of acres of junipers in my neighborhood, which I've frequently objected to, because for me growing up in Nevada, it was almost a sin to cut down a tree because it takes so long, especially the pinions, to grow. So my heart aches when I see those trees being just lopped off, and they continue to do so. And they have done so with the understanding that potentially it will increase habitat for sage grouse. We all know that the habitat's disappearing mostly because of forest fires. So I want to make sure that it's not running contrary to any contracts we might have with our federal partners or private partners that we already have to cut down these trees. And, you know, just want to make sure we're clear that what we're trying to do on one hand doesn't interfere with what we're trying to do on the other hand.
Mickey Hazelwood, for the record, I am not aware of any potential conflicts between those efforts and the solution. The way I understand it, this is a non-binding resolution, just acknowledging these interconnectivities and landscapes. But if Senator Scheibel or anyone else would like to comment, I defer to them.
This is Senator Scheibel for the record, and I also did not see any potential conflicts in reading the bill and thinking about the sage grouse habitat management that we've done in the past. And I would also agree with Mr. Hazelwood that this is a resolution, so it sets forth guiding principles. If it were to be read in tandem with a legally binding contract or another piece of our statute, then that would generally prevail. And when I say that, I mean the statute or contract, not the resolution.
Okay, so thank you for that clarification. I just needed it on the record because we have spent hundreds of hours and millions of dollars on that particular contract that cuts down trees. And so just wanted clarification. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. And I'll also note that particularly with the additions proposed by Eureka County, the resolution does not prioritize forests and trees over other management strategies that could assist in promoting healthy watersheds. Is there anything else, since there's a bit of a legal question, is there any additional clarification that you'd like to add, Mr. Amburn?
Alan Amburn for the record. No, I think Senator Scheibel stated it correctly. Basically, this is a non-binding resolution. That is, essentially all that it is doing is identifying places where better forest management could be made.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from members of the committee? All right. Seeing none, thank you again for the presentation, and we will move on to testimony. We'll start with testimony in support of AJR2. And with that, I'll turn it over to Broadcast Production Services, see if we have anyone wishing to provide testimony in support.
Thank you, Chair. To testify in support on AJR2, please press *9 now to enter the queue. Caller with the last three digits 010, please press *6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you. For the final time today, Jake Tibbetts, TIBB-ITTS, Eureka County Natural Resources Manager, speaking on behalf of Eureka County. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you again for another opportunity to speak to you today. Eureka County does support AJR2 as written, but we point out that healthy rangelands, they carry the same stated benefits of healthy forests. And since most of the land mass in Nevada is rangeland, it seems that this linkage should also be promoted. Further, overall soil health, regardless of the land classification, is very important for water quality and quantity. There is currently a soil health effort being pursued nationwide, and thus far, about 30 states this year have stood up soil health-related legislation. AJR2 is a natural fit for this effort in Nevada. So please also consider that as you're moving forward with AJR2. We'd also suggest specifically naming conservation districts in addition to just state agencies and local governments, because conservation districts are recognized in NRS 548 as being the local link to local communities for all renewable natural resource conservation matters. We'd also suggest a focus on specifically including private landowners and land users in the mix, and then focusing on collaborative and voluntary programs and identifying and implementing these programs in the constraints of our current appropriations and funding. I'll note that we did provide written testimony that includes a proposed amendment. And in that written testimony, there's some links in there if anybody's interested on information in this nationwide healthy soil legislation and policy initiative to see what other states have done in this related to soil health. And as you've heard, our potential amendment has been considered a friendly amendment. I want to thank Senator Scheibel for that and also TNC. And we look forward to helping push this across the finish line, Mr. Chair. And I'm happy to take any questions if you'd allow it. And again, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tibbetts. I believe we do have a quick question from Vice Chair Cohen.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Tibbetts. I was going through the proposed amendment and I just was a little confused and want to make sure I've got this correct. You've got the orange double underline language, which is
yeah.
Deleted language from the original bill and proposed to be retained in the amendment. But since there is an original language, is that just should that just be blue? Or
yes, Mr. Chair, Jake Tibbetts for the record. Sorry, and thank you for pointing that out. So yes, that was an oversight on a clerical error. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the clarification. I believe the color would be green. Additional language added since the original draft, but I think now we've got it clear that it would be in addition of new language. So I think that is sufficient. Any other questions for Mr. Tibbetts? Seeing none, thank you very much again for your testimony and for providing your amendment, sir. We'll move on to the next caller in support.
Caller with the last three digits 929. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Cara Steeland, K-A-R-A-S-T-E-E-L-A-N-D for the record. Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. Thank you for allowing me to provide testimony today. I'm a hydrologist with the Truckee Meadows Water Authority. TUMWA is the municipal water purveyor for Reno and Sparks, serving over 425,000 customers in the region. It's my pleasure to be here today in support of AJR2 on behalf of TUMWA. TUMWA believes in the importance of a healthy watershed and that water quality and forest health are undoubtedly linked. TUMWA's source water for the region's drinking water supply is in the forested headwaters of the Truckee River and its tributaries. On average, over 85% of our community's drinking water comes from the Truckee River. We rely on a healthy watershed to provide a clean water source for the community. Since TUMWA does not own most of the land surrounding its source water areas, collaboration with other organizations to ensure that the region's water supply continues to be of excellent quality. By working cooperatively with community organizations, we have improved the protection of the region's drinking water supply. We've worked closely with the Nature Conservancy and the U.S. Forest Service on a modeling effort to assess how important healthy forests are for our regional water supply and how large wildfires could impact drinking water quality. Increased turbidity and sedimentation from degraded natural landscapes can affect drinking water treatment processes and potentially increase the cost of water treatment. Independence Lake in California provides another great example of our partnership with the Nature Conservancy. This lake is an essential drought supply for the Truckee Meadows. TUMWA has helped fund the Nature Conservancy's management efforts to improve forest health around the lake, such as mechanical thinning and prescribed burning. Maintaining the integrity of the forest ecosystem surrounding Independence Lake is key to maintaining good water quality. In addition to this effort, TUMWA provides funding to many agencies and organizations throughout the watershed for forest management and restoration via grants through the Truckee River Fund. These partnerships are one part of TUMWA's larger source water protection program to ensure continued protection of the region's surface water and groundwater resources. Thank you for allowing me to be here today. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to speak in support of AJR2 on behalf of TUMWA.
Thank you for sharing your testimony with us. We'll move on to the next caller in support.
Caller with the last three digits 155. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christy Cabrera, CHRISTI-CABRERA, and I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director for the Nevada Conservation League. As the driest state in the Union, Nevada places a high value on our water resources. Forests play a critical role in collecting, filtering, and storing water, which is directly tied to water quality. However, our forests are threatened by drought, heat, and wildfire, all of which are exacerbated by climate change. To understand the threats of climate change and wildfire on our forests and our water resources, we need cooperation and coordination among land managers and water purveyors. This resolution is a step in the right direction to help protect our forests and our precious water resources. We urge your support. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Ms. Cabrera. We'll move on to the next caller in support.
Chair, there are no more callers in support at this time.
Thank you. With that, we'll move on to anybody wishing to provide testimony in opposition to Assembly Joint Resolution 2.
To testify in opposition on AJR2, please press *9 now to enter the queue. Chair, there are no callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you. And with that, we'll move to anyone wishing to provide testimony in the neutral position on Assembly Joint Resolution 2. I don't believe we have anyone wishing to provide neutral testimony on Zoom. So if somebody does, flag me down. In the meantime, BPS, can we move to anyone on the phone wishing to provide testimony in the neutral position?
To testify in neutral on AJR2, please press *9 now to enter the queue. Chair, there are no callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you very much. With that, I'll turn it back over to the presenters to provide any closing remarks that they'd like to make.
For the record, Mickey Hazelwood. Thank you, Chair Watts. I would like to say in closing that I and the Nature Conservancy support Eureka County's proposed amendments. As I mentioned earlier, we have seen the impacts from rangeland fires on our water resources, and there's an inextricable link there too. So again, we support those proposed amendments. The only other thing I'd like to say is just again, thank you for your time today, for your consideration of this resolution, and thanks to you all for taking up the important issues that Nevada faces in these days. Thank you.
And I'd like to echo Mr. Hazelwood's thanks and thank all of you for sticking with us through this presentation, engaging with questions, and for considering the bill.
Thank you very much. With that, I will close the hearing on Assembly Joint Resolution 2. I believe that takes us to the last item on our agenda, which is public comment. As a reminder, just with testimony, in order to provide public comment, you must register in advance to get the call-in information. And we ask that anyone wishing to provide public comment limit their remarks to 2 minutes, and that they do not discuss matters that have already been brought up during the hearings. So with that, we'll turn it over to Broadcast Production Services one more time to see if we have anyone in the queue wishing to provide public comment.
Thank you, Chair. To take your place in the public comment queue, please press *9 now. Chair, the public line is open and working, but it seems there are no more callers at this time.
All right. Thank you, Broadcast Production Services, for all your assistance in making sure that members of the public could participate and that our presenters could present their bills today. Members, thank you all for your time and attention. We had a pretty healthy agenda with work session items and 3 bill hearings, and I think we got through it very efficiently. So I just appreciate you all for that. Our next meeting will be on Monday, March 29th at 4 p.m. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.